Mitch.
Oh, yeah, baby. We love their Cougars. Mitch Harper.
Welcome on in, Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I'm your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Happy as always to have you on board of the podcast wherever you may be listening, whether it's on podcast, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter Live. Podcast is always live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at high noon Mountain Time. It's a new era of the Cougar Tracks podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Mitch_Harper and follow KSL Sports on all of the social media platforms. So here's what we got on deck for today's edition of the podcast. Just got off a Zoom call with BYU's Director of Player Personnel, Justin Anderson. He spoke with the media for the first time. I'll give some initial thoughts on that role, and as he's just barely touched the ground in Provo. Also, name, image, and likeness. It's a hot topic in college sports. I'll share my thoughts on the future of NIL for BYU and where they stand in everything. BYU basketball latest on the recruiting trail, the Big 12, and then BYU football returning missionaries. Who are the guys that could potentially make an impact? Who is returning? But guys that maybe could make an impact as a wave of players have returned over the last 10 or so days. I'll share my thoughts on that. But we started things off, again, Justin Anderson spoke with the media today. Nothing much groundbreaking per se as far as the player personnel role that he's in. He said consistently he's only been on the ground for about 1 day, so he's still sorting out the situation, but he's going to be an NFL GM and manage the roster, oversee things. He believes that the transfer portal and NIL are things that can be navigated and things that could potentially simmer down. So Justin Anderson, he's the new director of player personnel. Jason Ayu still on the staff as director of recruiting. You can see that on BYU's official website as they updated their official staff. He's still listed as that director of recruiting. I asked Anderson about how the roles will be handled between him and Jason Ayu, and he resorted to or deferred to he's been on the job for 1 day. They're still sorting those things out. But recruiting is a critical piece to what, BYU football is going to do, and recruiting coincides with name, image, and likeness. And Kalani Sitake made a little bit of headlines in the college football world on the last few days. He was on a Sirius XM interview a couple days ago on Big 12 Today, and one of his comments got taken a little bit out of context about 18, 19-year-olds shouldn't have that amount of money. I got the full quote up on KSLSports.com, but it does raise some interesting thoughts about NIL and where maybe BYU fits in all of this, because I will say, I think in short order, in about 9 months, it feels like BYU is a little bit behind in the NIL space. I think BYU is doing things the right way, what name, image, and likeness was intended to be, and that was to help guys make college football and their lives a little bit easier. I don't think anyone wanted to see stories of guys not able to get enough meals and be not able to pay their bills and things like that. No one wants that. No one wants that in college athletics. But this sudden wave of NIL collectives is changing the game. And it's completely different than I think any of us expected with NIL. We were so naive, right? We thought the biggest thing was going to be, local car dealerships are going to give guys a free ride and they're going to be doing commercials and getting a nice payday. No, now it's straight up, you're buying players. Nick Saban warned about it. Dabo Swinney warned about it. And Kalani Sitake aired some concerns as well. I thought his comment was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, especially the whole Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. I wonder if he was responding to the Antoine Davis official visit. I don't know. But I thought Kalani's comments were fine. I mean, I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to ruin BYU's chances of getting guys in the portal. They might be getting a guy very soon out of the transfer portal. But Kalani's quote was, I know how we, BYU, are going to deal with NIL and how we're dealing with whatever comes up for the transfer portal or whatever it is. It's going to be in line with what the vision of our school is and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's what we're going to be focused on. But if you ask me personally what my thoughts are on football and college football, I think there has to be a level of amateurism to it. I don't know if money is the answer to everything. I don't know if a young 18 and 19-year-old is supposed to have that much money in their bank account, but maybe there's a way that they can put into an investment fund for them into the future. But I don't know if a first date as a college student should be going to some big old steakhouse like Ruth's Chris. Nothing wrong with that, but that's great. But what do you do for the second date? Go to the Bahamas or something? Like, I don't know what to tell you. For a college student, sometimes just learn how to budget, learn to be on a budget and have a connection and hang out with your buddies and just have that connection that doesn't just rely on money. I think that there are some fair concerns right now with college football. I think it's a little bit, again, too much doom and gloom for the sport. I think everything will settle itself in. I'm very curious to see what these NIL collectives look like in a few years. Will these collectives, will these boosters, will these companies feel like they're getting the ROI that they're seeking? Maybe. I mean, what if you're paying $2 million, $3 million for a player and that team isn't winning at the level that you thought? Are you going to keep investing that level of money into future transfer portal guys? We'll see. I think that right now everyone's kind of just shocked by the whole thing. I will say, though, maybe the one-time waiver on the transfer has made all this kind of craziness. If you ended the one-time waiver as a transfer, and I kind of cringe even saying that, I think that it should be an option to just be able to move and be able to play right away. But I think that component has made this whole situation crazy. I don't think we would be worrying as much if the one-time waiver was not in play in college football. If these players were getting like a Jordan Addison at Pitt, who's now officially in the transfer portal, has got Texas, USC, all these different programs. If he ends up going to USC for $3 million, but he has to sit out this year, is anyone getting all bent out of shape over it? Maybe Pitt fans would be, but would everyone be up in arms about this? I mean, what Lincoln Riley is doing is insane by college football standards. That USC team that we saw BYU face last year in the Coliseum in November was downright terrible. And BYU struggled with that group. I mean, BYU was thin in their own right, but that was a terrible group. Lincoln Riley is completely overhauling that roster, and they could be a Pac-12 contender this year because of the portal. So I think it's just a shock to the system. I think things will simmer down. Things will settle in college football. But I will say, I don't think you can have a situation where schools are paying, or not schools, because it can't come directly from the coaches, but you can't have these NIL collectives basically paying off players to go to the school. You're only going to have the top end schools with the biggest fan bases, with the richest boosters, being able to do that. Mid-major football or, group of 5 football, you're never going to be able to do this. I would argue BYU wouldn't be able to do this. I mean, maybe they could. BYU's got a passionate fan base and a passionate booster group. Maybe Built Brands can truly become the next Gatorade, the next Nike, like they were saying last August, and they can maybe compete, but it's tough road to hoe for these type of programs to contend with the money that's getting thrown around by the USCs, the Miamis, the Alabamas. It's difficult. And I think that BYU is going about it the right way. I think they've approached NIL in a way that's successful, and it's kind of a laughable when you think about it, how there was that Sportico article a couple months back about the NCAA looking into BYU's Built Bar deal. Even Tom Homo said it was much ado about nothing. It wasn't an NCAA investigation by any stretch, but it's just a laugh, right? When you think about, let's look into BYU's Built Bar deal when you got some player who's not even in the portal yet. Now he is, of course, but last Friday night, national college football reporters are sounding off and reporting, going on the record with their reports, that Jordan Addison, the Biletnikoff Award winner, is going to go into the portal, and he's going to go to USC, and he's going to get $2 million to $3 million to do it. It's insane. But let's look at that Built Bar deal. It's almost humorous to think again, like, why were you even stressed about what BYU was doing? it's almost a laugh riot. I still think BYU will be able to carve out a niche in their space of recruiting. And I think a lot of the times too, because the NIL conversation gets brought up so much. It gets brought up so much in radio shows and radio hits and things like that, and podcasts like this one. But I think for BYU, they still get a lot of guys that I think have the mindset that, if I can get an NIL when I sign, great. But they kind of have the mindset like, I'm going to get my NIL money if I'm lucky enough to get it when I prove something at BYU. Maybe that's got to be recalibrated a little bit when you're in the Big 12 conference, because now you're playing Power 5 football and you got to get more 4-stars and an occasional 5-star once in a while to maybe win a Power 5 league. But I still think a lot of the BYU guys, NIL or not, they want to have the BYU experience. And it's a great thing that NIL is there, and it's an opportunity. And BYU's got the infrastructure in place to get them the deals necessary so they can make money. I mean, just off the top of my head, there's so many BYU players that have struck deals since last July 1st. I mean, Tyler Batty was early on with Balm Shop, but there's been so many guys that lesser known players that you don't know much about, but they're striking these deals with car wrapping companies. I mean, it's just all these different entities, these Division I football camps that are coming up next week. It's just I think BYU's doing the right way. I think they're doing a nice job, but it feels like, do they need to suddenly get an NIL collective to contend with all the craziness in college football? BYU basketball might need to get it too. Maybe more so in basketball, because basketball players, you get one guy that can change the fortunes of your entire season, your entire program. BYU gets Antoine Davis, a guy that he went into the portal out of Detroit Mercy to get some NIL deals. If you can get him a lot of money, maybe 6 figures, that changes the outlook of BYU basketball next season. It'll be interesting to see where Antoine Davis goes. Will it be K-State? Will he go back to Detroit? Will he go to BYU? He had his official visit last week, and the photos looked pretty crisp, man. They look pretty sharp. Even some of the people were in the comments like, hey, that's the move. That's the move, Antoine Davis. Top 20 scorer in college basketball history. BYU could potentially add him. The latest on BYU basketball, Rudy Williams kind of gave a vague tweet about should be a good game, the BYU versus Creighton game coming up on December 10th in Las Vegas. That BYU Creighton game was announced last September by Nick Robinson. He announced that it was going to be a neutral. BYU went to South Dakota last year to face the Jays in a snow-filled blizzard game up there at the Pentagon. And then they'll play in Vegas coming up in December. So that's nothing new as far as BYU and Creighton. But Rudy Williams might be part of that. He was kind of subtweeting about that game. So he's obviously got some vested interest. I think BYU's definitely in a great spot with Rudy Williams. But other BYU basketball prospects to keep an eye on, I think it's a player that I'm kind of monitoring in the transfer portal, Josiah Alec, 6'8" forward from UMKC. He's an interesting prospect, kind of like a Caleb Lohner type. If you go watch his film, maybe the hairstyle too is what's throwing me off, but kind of Caleb Lohner light in a way. Josiah Alec, 6'8". BYU needs some size. If they can get Rudy Williams, man, if they could get Antoine Davis, I think your backcourt's better than last season. I honestly believe that if you got Davis and Williams. That's just my opinion. But you need some size in the front court. Foose and Atiki can't handle everything. I think they could start, but they need some help in that front court. So I think Josiah Alec is a name to keep an eye on. UMKC forward. He's a prospect that I think looks pretty good. And again, kind of like a Caleb Lohner type. BYU needs to get some size. But keep in mind, with basketball, transfer portal activity, it's going to be going all the way up until about the first week of August. So if you're wringing your hands right now thinking, oh no, BYU doesn't have any players out of the portal yet, they'll get some guys. They've got 4 scholarships to work with. This thing's going to go up all the way to about the first week of August. Players in the transfer portal, they submit after May 1st. They're not going to be eligible to play for this upcoming season unless they get a waiver, but there's still plenty of players in that portal that entered before the May 1st deadline. There's a lot of quality players. And Mark Pope, people got to realize he has a knack for getting guys kind of out of thin air. Like, he'll get BYU into the conversation. He does everything that he can. He's been traveling, racking up the miles. I've been working on getting an interview with Coach Pope for this podcast and for Cougar Sports Saturday on KSL News Radio. But he has been racking up the miles. We'll get him eventually here soon. But this is going to be a roster creation formation that's going to go all the way up until about the first week of August, in my opinion. And you got the time. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of college basketball today. I can't emphasize it enough. This is nothing new in today's college basketball. Losing 6 guys in the portal, yeah, it's a bummer. But this is the new era. This is how college basketball operates. And tell me again, which players in this portal for BYU are completely irreplaceable? Caleb Lohner's the toughest loss because his potential is tantalizing, and I thought he had an NBA trajectory, but it wasn't being realized last season, and he at stretches last year, he was a liability on the offensive end. Who's irreplaceable? I don't think anyone that's entered the portal. Now, if you lost Foose, if you lost the Tiki, if you lost Dallin Hall, that's tough losses. Richie Saunders, of course, he's now back from a mission, speaking of which. He was welcomed at the airport by Foose. So that was pretty cool, seeing 2 Wasatch Academy kids chatting it up. But, BYU basketball, the guys that they've lost, not irreplaceable by any stretch. Doesn't demean them. Doesn't say that their contributions weren't valuable. It's just they're not irreplaceable. Now, if you had lost last year, a guy like Alex Barcelo, that's irreplaceable loss. BYU was a 24-11 team last season. And after about January 15th last year, they didn't beat anyone that was a quad 1 or quad 2 team. That's just the facts. And so to overhaul that roster, yeah, I don't think it's not a bad move. And I've said all along that I think that this is a year where if you take a little bit of a step back in terms of record, but you're building momentum to the Big 12 era, I think Cougar fans could get on board with that. But if you do get grad transfers, you got to hope that they are big-time grad transfers. And I think Antoine Davis, if you can potentially get him, that would be massive. Rudy Williams, really good. I don't know if it's a needle mover in college basketball. It'd be good for BYU, but it would be a solid addition to step in and compete and have a veteran to work alongside with Dallin Hall. Big 12 news on the docket here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. Appreciate all of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Share your comments. If you got any questions, commentary, I'll get to them at the end of the show. Appreciate all of you watching here on the show today. Again, all these shows, as you see in the bottom left corner, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, live at noon Mountain Time, the Cougar Tracks podcast, and you can listen on demand on the podcast feed on all major podcasting platforms. The Big 12 Conference should be at 14 teams in 2023. Brett McMurphy reported that the 3 AAC teams, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, going to be negotiating an 8-figure buyout, about $17 to $20 million to get out of the AAC per team. Don't you just appreciate the finesse that BYU put on the WCC? Like, I know the WCC doesn't have football, so naturally the exit fee is not going to be as much as, say, a league with football. But BYU is paying reportedly $500,000 to get it out of the WCC. I mean, some of these BYU students that graduate, these tech bros, could probably pay that $500,000 fee. That's all BYU's paying, while these other teams, they're going to be paying $17 to $20 million. That, to me, if you want to talk about maybe financial infrastructure and resources, because all 4 of these teams are not going to get an equal share of revenue in the first couple of years up until 2025, I think it kind of gives BYU a little bit of a leg up from the financial side of things to have success early on in the Big 12 Conference. That's just my thoughts. That's a lot of money. The AAC is going to get about $60 million upwards from those 3 teams in UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston. I teased it at the opening part of the show, BYU Football, return missionaries. Now, returning missionaries, I wanted to get to this because a lot of players have returned home from their missions. Guys that coming back in the spring, in the summer, it's a tricky thing now with returning missionaries. Back in the day, it used to be returning missionaries, regardless of when you came back, there was a level of expectation for some of these guys to contribute right away. I mean, there's so many times I can count in the era of Lavelle and Crowan and Bronco where some guy would get back in June and he's kind of expected to contribute in the first couple of weeks of the season. It's kind of crazy. Now, things have shifted. I think it's a testament to the depth that's improved in Kalani Sitake's program and their enhanced preferred walk-on pool of players. There's not as much of a need for the spring, summer, and fall returning missionaries to contribute right away after they get home from the mission. This was Kalani Sitake on missionaries that return after the winter semester, if they could potentially have an impact. I asked him about this back at signing day back in February, and this was his commentary on that.
It's not, you can't just go from serving a mission to even that transition to training for football is hard, right? So it's a good thing that we have a head coach that served a mission and know what that's all about, and a high number of coaches that have served missions. Our strength coach was a returned missionary himself as well, so this helps out, you know. So and I think the missionaries, their mindset is that they can play right now, but their bodies, we need to make sure we get their bodies right. So if they're not in it right now, then they're just we're trying to get them ready. So there's going to be a number of players that are going to come home throughout in the next, I don't know, March till July and even August, and some of them won't be ready to go until January. And so we will put them, they'll gray shirt, they'll take a couple classes, and then they'll work out, and they'll be in a workout program that'll get them ready to train in the off season in January 2023, and then to prepare to play in the fall of 23. But there'll be some that'll be a little bit more ready, and but in our research and in the experience that we've had, the numbers show that when missionaries come home in the summer, they all get hurt in the fall, and that's tough to have a young men get hurt and then have to spend off season rehabbing rather than conditioning and getting stronger, and that puts them behind. And so we learn from what we've already seen in years past and try to make sure our guys are in a better position. And the safest thing is to count on them to gray shirt. Also working with COVID numbers and the roster numbers and the extra year eligibility, that adds a little bit more to it. And we have to, because of our mission program, because of the extra year with COVID, we probably have to do a lot more balancing than others.
There you go. That's Kalani Sitake on returning missionaries for the spring and summer. So if you're thinking about who could be the guys that impact in 2022, there may be few and far between, but I do think there are some guys that could make an impact this year. I do believe that. Some of them have returned recently, and let's go through the list of the RMs that are coming back to BYU football in 2022. So they had some winter RMs that were part of spring football. Guys like Logan Fano, already injured, kind of a bummer there. Brooks Smiley, injured as well during spring. So what Kalani was noting, that a lot of guys that come back from the missions, they get injured. It's already showing signs of that. But I do think that there are a few guys, like I said, that could contribute. The guys that I think could contribute right away, and not necessarily, when I say contribute, not necessarily be a too deep guy, but someone that's on the travel roster, someone that's making the trip to these road games when you play USF on September 3rd. They could be on that roster with the team. Bodie Schoonover, linebacker, edge rusher out of American Fork High School, big-time prospect, 4-star recruit, had offers from the likes of Nebraska. Bodie is a big-time prospect. He got back from his mission about 7 or so days ago, served a mission in South Africa. Sometimes those missions can have a serious toll on the body. So it'll be interesting to see where he's at physically to get ready, but an incredible talent. Logan Fano, I spoke rave reviews about him. He gets back from the mission. He served a stateside mission, but he was having an instant impact in spring ball. I think Bodie is the type, as an outside linebacker, edge rusher, he could be, I think you'll see flashes from him in fall camp. I think he's definitely going to be part of the 105 when fall camp starts. He's a name to keep an eye on. I also think Tate Romney, too. I mean, it's a Romney. Gunnar Romney's been good. Baylor Romney was good. Youngest brother to the Romneys. Tate Romney, another linebacker. He's a different body type than his older brothers. He's more on the defensive built side. Excited to see Tate Romney. He, like Bodie, a massive addition to BYU football when he signed with the Cougars out of Chandler High School. Tate Romney, big-time prospect as well. So he would be another one. And I also think, too, because of need. I think the linebackers at the very top of the depth chart are loaded. You got Peyton Wilgar, you got Keenan Peely, Max Tooley, Pepe Tanovasa, loaded linebacker room. But a common theme with the top three guys, and Ben Bywater too, he's also in there. A common theme, though, is all those linebackers have dealt with injuries. And if some of those guys aren't ready to go or are dealing with any sort of nagging injuries, you might need some of these linebackers to emerge. And I think also there's a thought, too, that in the 2023 season and beyond, who's the next wave of linebackers? Because all those guys I mentioned, they could be gone next season outside of maybe Ben Bywater. Who's the next wave of great linebackers at BYU? I'll say right now, I don't know yet. I think Josh Wilson's got a lot of potential. Haven't seen much yet, though. So I think you want to maybe get some snaps, potentially, ideally, to the Tate Romneys, to the Bodie Schoonovers, because I think you want them in 2023 to kind of hit the ground running to where they could be maybe starters next season. Some other RMs that just the list of players that are returning for the 2022 season. Logan Peely, he's back. He was at some spring practices. He's the younger brother to Keenan Peely. Preston Rex, younger brother to Isaac Rex. Preston's going to be good. He's going to be a talented safety for BYU. Keep an eye on Preston Rex. Going to be a really good football player. Underrated. I thought his recruitment was a little bit under the radar for what his talent to me suggested, but it'll be a perfect fit for BYU. Preston Rex, a name to keep an eye on. Drayson Havea, Provo High kid. He's back from his mission. Nukaluve Helu, Roy Helu's, I believe, cousin. He's back from the mission. Tooele High running back, good football player. BYU's always had success with quality running backs over the years that are in-state kids. Typically, a guy like Helu, he gets recruited by a lot of schools, but they're like, oh, we'll play at a different position. We'll play on defense. BYU, they'll play at running back. Because Harvey Yunga experienced that coming out of Timpview. So many schools wanted him in other positions. Luve Helu is someone to watch for the future. I think he's more, because of the depth at running back, there's not much of a pressing need for him to step in and contribute, but it would be nice in fall camp if he is part of that 105 roster to maybe get a chance to get some reps and see what he can possibly do. Other guys that'll probably come back in the summer, late fall, Ace Kafusi, Jake Griffin, Koa Eldridge. He's a two-sport guy, baseball and football. Devin Downing, Ty Burke, Sitalingi Havea, Isaiah Tupo, Mac Oliuso, Chase Hopkins, Kel Mickelson, and Kyle Vasso, linebacker from California. So that's a list of return missionaries, but the guys to me that I think could contribute, Bodie Schoonover and Tate Romney, big-time talents. Hard to deny that talent from getting on the field, and they're going to be relentless workers too. Those guys have great work ethic. Would not be surprised if physically they look the part to get on the field and maybe contribute in some stretches during the 2022 season. They'll probably hit a wall. It happens with every RM, but those are the guys for me that I'm going to be keeping an eye on that could potentially have an impact as RMs in 2022. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the show on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating and a review. It helps out the show a ton. I'm really enjoying these live streams. I hope you are as well. We'll catch you next time on the Cougar Tracks podcast. Oh, I got a comment here. Sam Farnsworth. Lunch with Mitch and Cougar Tracks 3 days a week? Where has this been all my life? Great work, Mitch. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that. Great work on Sports Beat as well, Sam. Talk to you next time. You're on the Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com.